You're listening to the Jam Price Show, all about movies. And today, my guest is AJ Schnack, and we're going to talk about his brand new documentary, Majority Rules. And let me just say, he's a writer, he's award-winning writer, director, and producer, AJ Schnack. And I can't wait to talk to you about this. This is historic day today. We're recording this actually on the first presidential debate. So the show will air a couple weeks after this, unfortunately, but it's a great topic for us to be talking about today of all days.
It certainly is. Yeah, thanks for having me. I feel like there's been so much political news happening like this week and probably will continue over the next few weeks.
Yes, and I'm a news junkie. I'm a
Yeah,
political news junkie, so
me
I have to
too.
wean myself off. I have to go. Okay, we have to not listen.
Yeah, I know the feeling.
So let's talk about how because you've done a number of films, political films over the years, and tell me a little bit your story. After 2016, you were a little burnt out. So let's talk about that first.
Yeah, I mean, was I probably D.A. Pennebaker is the person who made me want to do documentaries. I think his work throughout many decades still is some of, my favorite nonfiction films, and his involvement in primaries, which is sort of like, ground zero for me for political documentary. And then, of course, the film he and Chris Hedges just made, The War Room, two of the great political documentaries of all time. And so that was really inspiring to me about making these kinds of films. And combine that with, I grew up in the Midwest, went to the University of Missouri, and one year working at the student newspaper, a bunch of us got in a car and drove up to Des Moines to cover the Iowa caucuses. And it was just, there was something about that, my already being out, news and elections. My family was the type that, would watch every convention, even though I never knew how my parents voted. Like, we just always watched every big political event. And so that was just always a thing I wanted to do within a documentary. And the first one we did was a film called Convention, which we filmed at the 2008 Democratic Convention in Denver, where Barack Obama accepted his party's nomination. And then it just kind of kept going. I ended up making a caucus film in Iowa about the Republicans who were running in 2011, 2012. Made a couple series of midterms in 2014, and then ended up doing a few projects around the 2016 election. And as you said, that one was just very difficult. It was hard to film. The candidates that were kind of the last ones standing at the end were candidates that ran very big campaigns or sort of arena-based campaigns. They weren't the kind of retail politics that I like to film, that I got to do in 2011. And I don't know if you remember, like, it was also just a really ugly campaign.
Oh, yes. And we're being reminded on a daily basis.
Yeah, and it hasn't gotten better.
No.
Also, that's also weird. But yeah, so like after that was done, I was like, okay, that was a nice long decade-long project. I got to do this thing I really enjoy, and I did it in a bunch of different ways. I did features, I did short form series, I did an art installation. Like, I've done that whole thing. And so yeah, by the time 2017, 2018 rolled around, I was pretty sure I had closed the book on doing any kind of political documentaries in the future. But yet here we are in 2024.
Yes, here we are. I have to say, when Sam sent this to me, I went, "Oh, immediately, yes, I want to do this show for sure." So let's talk about what changed your mind and why you decided to make Majority Rules.
Well, one of the producers of the film, Nick Troiano, he is really involved in the election reform space and in having people rethink sort of the way that that states conduct various elections, both the way primaries are conducted and also just, who gets to have a say. Do independents get to vote in a primary? And why are primaries so important, but we pay so little attention to them. And so he came to me and he was like, listen, I think this is a really interesting election. Alaska is going to do something that no state has ever done before. They are going to conduct elections using an all candidate open primary ballot, which we also use in California. But instead of, like in California, sending the two top finishers to the general election, Alaska's going to send four. And in sending those four, then they're going to conduct for the general election, it's going to be a ranked choice ballot. And so you won't just pick one, you'll rank all the candidates that you would like to rank in order of your preference. So if your first choice gets knocked out because they have the least amount of votes, then your ballot will go to your second choice or your third choice. And even with all that, and I've used ranked choice before in some other ways, and I'm interested in it, but I was like, no, I don't want to do another election film. But there seemed to be something really interesting happening in Alaska the more I looked at it. Certainly the presence of Sarah Palin as a congressional candidate, someone who had been out of electoral politics for over a decade, but one of the most, consequential political figures in America and over the last, 20 years. I don't know. There were just so many things. It was kind of like the stars aligned, and Nick got very persistent. And it suddenly was pretty clear that this was a really unique moment to capture a changing political landscape that I think in most cases in documentary, we tend to try to look at something that happened in the past. Like we would look at like, oh, that was a crazy election. How did it happen? How did everybody get involved? Let's reassemble everyone 10 years later and explain it. This was the opportunity to actually tell the story of what was happening, not only in Alaska, but potentially in the rest of the country around these particular reforms, and to be able to do it while it was still happening.
It was, good, perfect timing, actually. Within what prompted it more was the congressman who had been there, or was he senator, who had been there for what?
49 years. Yeah, Congressman Don Young, longest serving member of the U.S. House of Representatives, and announces, in February of 2022, he's going to run for a 25th term. So he will, be able to try to get to 50 years in Congress. And Alaska only.
Oh, you've frozen up. Hopefully it will unfreeze here. Oh, there you go. Okay,
Yeah.
hopefully Alaska will.
Yeah. I was just saying that he was, Alaska's only representative, was going for, a 25th term, and he died flying back home to Alaska on a plane. And so Alaska had already decided they were going to completely change the way they do elections, but the Division of Elections thought, well, we have until August to figure that out, because August was when the primary was going to be. But Don Young died, early in the year, and so they actually had to do a special election much earlier. So they had a different primary in June. So they scrambled to basically educate people in Alaska as to how this new system was going to work. And like 48 candidates come out of, people who've had this pent up desire, I think, to be a congressperson from Alaska. 48 candidates, including a guy who's an actual city council person, whose name really is Santa Claus, are all candidates to try to take Don Young's seat. And so there was a lot of really interesting stuff that was happening in Alaska, when I decided to jump in.
And you said they had already decided to use this. How did they get the majority rules on the ballot to begin with? That would also interesting.
Well, it's kind of a funny thing. Alaska has such a strong independent streak. Like the largest group of Alaskans voting wise are independents or unaffiliated voters. They're not Republicans or Democrats. And my sense being up there is, there's a really strong libertarian streak in Alaska. Pretty much like, I'm not going to bug you, you don't bug me. We're just, we just got to take care of ourselves kind of attitudes. But they had put it on the ballot in 2020 because there had been these cases where people had won major elections with much less than 50% of the vote, because they had some strong third parties, they had some strong independents, and so they kind of put through this, initiative saying like, we want to change the way we're going to do our voting. There were some other pieces to that as well, like getting rid of dark money but there was this change to the election system that was going to make it so that independents could vote um, in the primary, so that anybody, whether you're Republican or Democrat, you could vote for anyone you wanted in the primary. You didn't just have to vote for the person who matched your party ID. And that seemed to be, it was appealing enough to Alaskans that it passed by a narrow margin. So the 2022 election was going to be the first time that they conducted an election, not just Alaska. This first time anyone in America had ever tried to do an election this way. And they just ended up having to do it a lot sooner than they thought because of Don Young's death.
And so as a result of doing that, let's talk a little bit about that,
Yeah.
So you had 48 candidates.
Yeah. And so they are in the primary. There's an early June primary, and those 48 candidates then get narrowed down to four, the top four people out of the 48. And the number one vote getter is Sarah Palin, the former governor, the former Republican vice presidential nominee in 2008. She gets the most votes. Another Republican, Nick Begich, he gets the second most. Coming in third is a guy named Al Gross. He's an independent who, has been seen by some Democrats as maybe slightly aligned to Democratic or progressive ideals. And then there was a relatively unknown former state representative named Mary Peltola, who came in fourth. And they were the four that went on to a special election in August of 2022. And I think people really thought that it was kind of Sarah Palin's race to lose. I mean, she obviously has wide name recognition, but a combination of factors, including the fact that you might remember Sarah Palin resigned as governor when she was still governor after she had run for vice president. And there were a number of Alaskans, including Republican Alaskans, who kind of never forgave her for this idea that she quit on the state to pursue fame and fortune in the lower 48. And so while it seemed to a lot of people like she was kind of a shoe-in for this role and this position, it actually ended up being a much more difficult race for her, I think, than maybe even she expected.
And so we go down to the four, the election in August.
Yeah.
And, it's interesting because you follow them as they're campaigning, and Sarah Palin really didn't know how to campaign with this new system the way she was used to. She probably just thought she was a shoe-in too, most likely.
Well, yeah,
And
and I think that for her, she just felt like, I mean, it was sort of a combination of she didn't like that there was another Republican. Like she had already, in her mind, like she got more votes than Nick Begich. Like, she's the winning Republican. Like, why is he even still around? Like, why does he get to move on? It should be her head to head against Mary Peltola, or her against Mary Peltola and Al Gross, since he was running as an independent. So yeah, she really did not understand why there were two Republicans still in the race, and just expected that he would drop out. And he had no real intention of dropping out because he had already gotten in the race before she did. Thought that the race was probably his to win.
right.
So you have this kind of crazy scenario where you have this war between these two Republican candidates, neither of them really willing to budge. But what she also, I think, felt so offended by him not getting out of the race that she also was like, I don't want you to rank anyone. So just vote for me. Like, I'm only going to vote for myself. So just only vote for Sarah Palin. Don't vote for Nick Begich second. Don't vote for anybody second. Just vote for Sarah Palin. And Nick, I mean, he was more like, I want you to vote for me first, but vote for Sarah second. And if you vote for Sarah first, then vote for me second. He was more attuned, I think, to the machinations of a ranked choice ballot. But she just that it went against everything I think that she stood for. This idea that you would, you know, not just choose her first and she would get your only vote, which is how they did it in the primary. And she won that. So I think she felt like that's just the way it should be. Like if you only choose one person, that she's going to win.
And then,
Yeah, and well,
even
yeah,
I have to tell you the way you've laid this out. Let me just say this. Even though I knew the outcome, it
yeah.
was as if, I mean, it was like a mystery. I mean, it was just like, yeah, I loved how you laid it out. Were you the narrator of it, by the way?
I am, I
You
am.
are.
Yeah,
Okay. And I
yeah.
love that, how you laid it all out so beautifully and perfectly. But it was like there was suspense, even though I knew.
Well, I mean, I think probably, when I make documentaries, I mean, part of what I'm trying to get the audience to feel is sort of how it felt to me at the time. And I just remember, that being in August of 2022. So, spoiler alert, Mary Peltola had the most votes on election night. I mean, she had like 38% of the vote, just a little bit more than Sarah Palin. And so then the question was, like, well, there's still going to be this ranked choice balloting at play, and all Sarah has to do is get enough of Nick Begich's second place votes. Like if she gets, I think she needed 2/3. Like if she could get 2/3 of his like second place votes, like then she's gonna win and she is gonna be the congressperson. And and in the end, she doesn't. She doesn't get enough of the votes, and in part probably because she was, so offended by Nick Begich. She didn't want him in the race anymore. And so there were a lot of people who voted for Nick Begich who did not rank Sarah Palin second. They either ranked nobody or they ranked Mary Peltola second. And so here you have the state of Alaska, which I think most of us view as a pretty red state, ends up not just giving her the most votes on election day, but using this new ranked choice preferential ballot system, instant runoff, so many names for it. But if using this system, Mary Peltola wins, and it's kind of an earthquake, not just in Alaska but all over the country, because suddenly Republicans who had not really gone after the idea of ranked choice voting, as a bad thing, it suddenly became something that they said, this is a threat. It's a threat to democracy. It's a scheme that Democrats are going to use to try to win elections where they normally couldn't win elections. And so it becomes this kind of crazy moment that is bigger than Alaska when Mary Peltola is able to win. The funny thing, of course, is that under any other, if you're not using a ranked choice system where you're trying to get somebody to get 50% or more of the vote, if you're just going for who has the most votes on election day, well, Mary Peltola wins that too. But that doesn't seem to matter to people because they are just focused on this idea that somehow it doesn't make any sense that a Democrat was able to win in Alaska. And so then, but then of course, she has to, all of these people are running again because they've had a special election and it's just to fill the seat for 2 months. So 2 months later, there's going to be the general election and Sarah is back and Nick Begich is back and Mary Peltola is back, and they're all running again to try to fill to serve a full term. And the question is does Sarah learn new lessons about how to run under the system? And in fact, she does. She changes her strategy to try to end up being able to defeat Mary Peltola when it comes to a full term. But her heart may not be fully in it, and that's a very interesting thing to see. Somebody who may be in a position where they're now looking at this whole enterprise and wondering, maybe they should have stayed out of electoral politics and kept doing, the kind of the other things that Sarah Palin was doing, personal appearances and, TV shows and things like that. So, but yeah, she's I think no matter your politics, She is a unique character, and I just think she's great in the film. I just
Yeah.
she's a great character.
Yeah, yeah, she is. And it adds a whole lot of new spice to the to this too with her in
Yeah.
it for sure. And wasn't she backed by the former president?
She was. That's why she got into the race. I mean, she was asked. Former President Trump called her up and said, "You need to jump in this race." And that was a point where Nick Begich had already declared that he was running. The state Republican Party had already endorsed Nick Begich to be their candidate. So she kind of came in a bit like a fly in the ointment. And I think that was. I think that was the other thing was this expectation that just her huge name recognition, that she was a popular governor until she resigned, and then the fact that she was endorsed and kind of pushed into the race by Donald Trump. I think people really did expect, like, you put all those things together, and in a state like Alaska, like that's going to be a winning formula, and it just didn't turn out that way.
No. And then in the general election, Mary Patola totally ran away with it at that stage, right?
Yeah, I mean, she increased her support, and I think one of the things that I love about the film, and I think we're only spoiling things to the extent that people don't know how to look things up on the internet. It's like or like check to see who the congressperson from Alaska is right now. But I think one of the things that will be surprising to people, and that they won't know, is one of the ways in which Mary Peltola does expand her reach in the general election is to form these bipartisan like coalitions with Republicans in the state, with supporters and family members of Don Young, and how also the way that when they change how they have conducted these elections, just the way in which partisan activity seems to decrease, that people within the state house start acting very differently, not feeling like they're beholden to political parties in the same way that they may have been previously. So yeah, I was really fascinated, as a political junkie, just seeing like, oh, it actually does seem to change behavior, and it does seem to encourage people to not be so caustic and hateful towards people who are in the other party. And that was I don't know. I grew up outside of Missouri, which always prided itself as being a bellwether state, that it was whichever way Missouri went, that was the way the country went. That's not really where Missouri is right now. But that idea where people kind of aren't at each other's throats all the time. I don't want to be Pollyanna about it, but I mean that it's nice to see.
It is, and Mary Patola, certainly, Lisa Murkowski,
Yeah, McCaskey.
how
Yeah,
their close relationship and how Lisa was supporting her and also endorsing her too. This is the way government should run. Let's put it this way. I think this is why it gave me hope when I watched this. I'm sure you felt that too after as you said, you were cynical after 2016. I think
yeah.
a lot of us were, but it's our country's not functioning anymore. It's just not functioning. And we need more of this. We need, this is why we've always, it's worked before, but it's falling apart. And we do need to have changes in the way we vote. And this gave me hope. And the fact that you did do some other states that are looking at this as as a possibility. Too. And of course, we need to revamp the Electoral College, but that's a whole nother topic for another day. Maybe
Yeah,
you'll do the next one on that one,
yeah,
right,
maybe.
AJ?
I mean, I agree. I just felt like by the end of it, there were so many things. I started to look at the way Congress and state legislatures were acting, and you could see that there were issues that had clearly broad bipartisan support that weren't able to get any movement within either a state legislature or within Congress. And you could see that it was because of the way that the reward system is based, that it's like people didn't feel comfortable going against what their party position was, or felt like that they would be primaried out of office if like that they just even hinted that they would be cooperative. And I was like, that seeing that could change and that there was actually this, I mean, it's anecdotal, right? We're looking at one state,
Right.
but it is there is an anecdote.
Yeah.
That's why we say anecdotal.
Yes.
To see that, like, oh wow, people can actually decide we don't have to behave that way anymore because that permission structure has been blown up. And that, if you could see that happen on a larger scale, I mean, that would be pretty incredible.
It would be, and I agree. All right, we have our time has run out, but where can people see Majority Rules? Because I think everybody should see this film. I definitely do, especially now as we're heading into a new election in this country, a big election. Where can people see this film?
We're going to be playing theaters all over the country this summer, and then yeah, in the fall it'll definitely be available. Certainly for at the regular sites, iTunes, Apple TV, et cetera, et cetera. But we may even be doing a deal where we make it available for people to watch for free on the internet. I think those details are still being worked out, but yeah, I would love for people to see it this fall before the election, because I think so much of we doom scroll on social media, and we are in this kind of death spiral, it feels like a lot of the time, but it doesn't have to be that way. And a lot of what is able to be done is getting done by just ordinary citizens.
Yes.
People who like look at how something is going on in their city, in their state, if they belong to a party, in their party, and they're just saying, like, you know what, we can do something different.
Yes, definitely. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. Thank you for making this film. Everybody, check out Majority Rules. As AJ has said, it will be more available as the season progresses. So, wish you much success. Thank you so much for being on the show, AJ.
Thank you, Jan. It was a real pleasure.
Lovely meeting you. Bye.
Lovely to meet you. Bye.